And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Hi, I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook to take us into Tuesday and Wednesday. Starting with Monday's sea ice, it's extensive throughout the far north. We had very strong winds, did open some polynyas. Those have had a tendency to want to refreeze, and so rather short-lived, but down here along areas of the southwest coast, more notable, especially off of the lower Yukon Delta. And then areas of Bristol Bay had milder temperatures above freezing push in with the strong winds, so a lot of the ice in here was disrupted, even up into Kuskokwim Bay, though we will likely see this area remain agitated pretty much off the Yukon Delta and down through Kuskokwim and Bristol Bays as we go through midweek and into the upcoming weekend, because we have a couple of more storm systems, maybe not as deep as the past two, but at least two more coming up here Wednesday into Thursday, and then again over the weekend, Saturday. So taking a look at what we have out there for the synoptic setting for late tonight, early on Tuesday morning. We have a couple of areas of weaker low pressure off the British Columbia coast back here into the lower Gulf, and then that's what's left of the big storm that came up through the Bering Sea earlier in the weekend. Here comes the next storm. It'll be down around 960 millibars early on Tuesday morning. That low will lift up across the central Aleutians Tuesday night, so we'll find this frontal system expanding north and northeastward. Meanwhile, trough of low pressure lags out here over the Gulf and just off of the Panhandle coast. High pressure, though, will be building over northwest Canada, over the Yukon. We'll likely get a central pressure up around 1050 millibars by Wednesday and Thursday morning. This is going to increase the pressure gradient across the Panhandle, which means stronger outflow winds out of the north-northeast, and that's going to bring in drier air, clearer skies. Could also lead to some areas of freezing spray. And then for Wednesday afternoon, the low lifts up into the central Bering with this front. This front is a windy front. It's going to have plenty of moisture along it, and there's going to be a couple of moisture feeds rotating through here. So the likelihood of more winter storms, we have blizzard warnings issued for the Kuskokwim Bay area into Nunavik Island for midnight Tuesday night through noon Wednesday, and then winter storm watches for the lower Yukon and all the areas along Norton Sound, the south and west side of the Seward Peninsula into St. Lawrence Island for Wednesday into Thursday. So stay tuned to later updates. And meanwhile, as this high builds up to near 1050 millibars on Wednesday, we're going to have that stronger northeasterly offshore flow, allowing for clear skies, but much colder temperatures. Some morning lows will be in the single digits and teens here across the Panhandle as we go through middle and late week. So winds are going to respond. Tuesday, look for more northerly winds across the inner channels, 15 to 20 knots, waves choppy, 3-4 feet as high as 5-6 feet down toward Dixon Entrance. Offshore flow is strong out of the east, northeast, 20-25 knots south of Sitka. Generally 15 knots there north of Gustavus. By Wednesday, north winds 30 knots there within Lynn Canal, with waves building as high as 8 feet. You can have areas of freezing spray with that kind of wind. 25-knot north winds across Stevens Passage, 5-foot waves, north winds to 15 knots down there toward Ketchikan and Metlakatla. For the outer Gulf Coast and the nearshore waters within 15 nautical miles of shoreline, we expect east-northeast winds around 20 knots with waves 8 to 10 feet. Across the northwestern Gulf, strongest winds on Tuesday will be here at the entrance of Cook Inlet. Westerly gales, west-northwest gales, 35 knots, waves 9-11 feet. Northwest winds to 25 knots within open waters here at Prince William Sound, 5-foot waves, and generally northwest winds 25 to 30 knots there outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance and off of the Kenai coast. And by Wednesday, winds do come down. Most areas, northeast winds 15 knots, Prince William Sound with waves running a few feet. Northeast winds 15 knots, upper Cook Inlet, 3-foot waves where there is open water. And then still some 30-knot northeasterly winds as you get outside of Anchor Point down toward Kamishak Bay with waves 6 to 8 feet. Across Kodiak Island on Tuesday, winds will be northwest to westerly at 25 to 20 knots. Those winds are going to shift back around to the east, pick up to 30 to 35 knots, especially north of Cold Bay in advance of that next low pressure that'll be lifting across the central Aleutians on Tuesday night. Now, by Wednesday, that front will be creeping upwards along the Alaska Peninsula. So ahead of it, we expect widespread southeasterly winds to 30 knots. Waves running 5 to as high as 12 feet once you get south of False Pass, and generally 4 to 6 feet on the Bering side. And then on Tuesday for the Aleutians, that low pressure center will be just off to the southwest of Adak, and the circulation around this thing like this, 35 to 45 knot east-southeast gales across the eastern Aleutians. And then back here toward the western Aleutians, the winds turn to the north-northwest, 35 to 40 knots. Come Wednesday, that area of low pressure will have lifted up into the central Bering. So in the wake of it, frontal system pushing off to the east. Winds will be south-southwest 30 knots over the eastern Aleutians and then turn westerly. 40-knot gales, Atka through Adak and Kiska. Highest waves out there down across areas of the North Pacific south of the Aleutians, just over 20 feet. And then along the southwest coast, north winds 10 knots within Bristol Bay, so relatively quiet at least early Tuesday. Southeast winds 20 knots within Kuskokwim Bay. 40-knot easterly gales, the Pribilof Islands with waves building 15 feet. And look along the lower Yukon Delta up through Norton Sound, south winds 10 to 15 knots. But that will change on Wednesday as this low lifts up into the central Bering, not far from St. Matthew. We have the front arcing up ahead of it, so you'll have east-southeast winds turning toward the south-southwest once the front passes. But before then, look at this. We have 30-knot east winds within Bristol Bay, 35-knot gales within Kuskokwim Bay, higher winds through Etolan Strait, and 40-knot winds out of Norton Sound, so there could be some Polinia is opening a bit more here along the lower Yukon coast, along with adverse winter conditions. You're going to have blizzard conditions late Tuesday night in through Wednesday morning, along especially northern Kuskokwim Bay, Etolan Strait, Nunavik Island, and that wind and snow will spread up through all of the lower Yukon Delta and Basin, and then up into Norton Sound as we head into later Wednesday and Thursday. Long south of the Bering Strait, winds will be south as high as 20-25 knots there south of the strait on Tuesday. Look for south-southeast winds 25 knots, lower Chukchi Sea. Winds become more easterly from Wainwright along the Arctic coast, still as high as 40 knots around Kaktovik, so there still will be some areas of blowing snow there. On Wednesday, 35-knot easterly gales falling off to 25 knots, Prudhoe Bay down through Utqiagvik. And then as we drop through the lower Chukchi Sea and out of Kotzebue Sound, look for easterly winds 25 to 30 knots. And again, once we get south of the Bering Strait, winds could be as high as 40 knots out of the east side of Norton Sound, and 30-knot easterly winds, 35-knot easterly gales along the north side of St. Lawrence Island.